Cinema St. Louis's The Lens is now the takeup.com, a place to gather after the film is over. I'm your host, Joshua Ray, and fear not, all your favorite episodes of The Lens featuring all your favorite guests are still here in your feed, just a little refocused. Stay subscribed to us here for future episodes, and you can follow along for new ones and more at the Takeup STL.
Hi, listeners. This is your Lens podcast host, Joshua Ray. This past weekend, I had the pleasure of meeting with Broadway legend Ken Page and Opera Theater St. Louis's Jim Robinson, the artistic director, to talk about Harvey Milk, the Harvey Milk opera that Opera Theater St. Louis is mounting this summer, and the Harvey Milk Film Festival that they threw at the Webster University Film Series. This is in co-sponsorship with QFest St. Louis, which runs April 29th through May 5th. You get tickets and information at cinemastlouis.org. And our other partner is the St. Louis LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank everyone from all organizations for having all of us here to celebrate Harvey Milk. I will say that the audio was done live and on the fly, so apologies for any kind of weak spots there, but I think overall you're going to have a good listen. Enjoy. Well, thank you for joining us here to celebrate Harvey Milk. Few of you look familiar from last night, right? Okay, great. So you've got a little bit leg up. Who's seen the Times of Harvey Milk before? Right. Okay, who's seen Milk before? Very good. All right. So that's good context to have, but not necessarily necessary for what we're about to do. But what we are about to do is bring up a couple of stars up here with me. First, we have James Robinson, served as artistic director of Opera Theater St. Louis since 2008, where he plays an instrumental role in curating artistic programming and is a resource for rising composers and librettists. He has led nationally renowned productions at Opera Theater that include John Adams' The Death of Klinghoffer, Ricky Ian Gordon's Grapes of Wrath, and world premieres of Terence Blanchard's operas Champion and Fire Shut Up in My Bones. He remounted Fire Shut Up in My Bones to open the Metropolitan Opera's 21-22 season to international acclaim, and will stage Champion at the Met in 2023. Outside of your work at Opera Theater St. Louis, directed opera houses around the world. Grammy award-winning production of Porgy and Bess opened the Met's 2019 season and has been seen at English National Opera and Dutch National Opera. And you're doing Butterfly in Santa Fe this summer. James, would you care to join me on the stage? All right, we got another treat for you. This is Ken Page, who has worked in all areas of entertainment industry for nearly 50 years, including Opera Theater St. Louis and 43 productions with the Muni. He's been seen on Broadway in the original casts of Cats, Ain't Misbehavin', as well as The Wiz and Guys and Dolls. He's also performed in Paris and London's West End. He was seen in the film adaptations of Torch Song Trilogy and Dreamgirls. Ken is the recipient of the Theater World Award, Drama Desk Award, 2 Grammy recognitions, and St. Louis's Kevin Kline Award. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Page. All right, well, let's start with the subject at hand. Let's talk about Harvey Milk and talk about these productions that we're celebrating. The first being Rob Epstein's film from 1984, the documentary, The Times of Harvey Milk. The second being Gus Van Zant's Milk, the narrative version of that film, as I might argue a little later. And then, of course, the Harvey Milk remount that you're doing this summer. I want to start with a quote from Epstein, wondering how he should tell Harvey Milk's story with his film. How do you reconstruct this story in such a way that it has the same basic emotional punch as a well-done verite film? That's what we set out to do, basically just retell the story in the way that it was experienced by the people who lived it. And then Van Zandt doesn't necessarily counter that. He's taking it to another degree and saying, how do we center the Harvey Milk experience in the narrative sense by expanding it into the realm of fiction and using performers and actors? And he says, I think it would be a mistake if it gets too sanctified. He said that we didn't get the quote from him for the title for this. His story is significant because he was such an everyman. He was a man of history, and that he understood what kind of leadership was necessary. So when we're talking about the Harvey Milk and these different adaptations, I want to throw a question to both of you, and I want to know who Harvey Milk is to you as a performer, but also as a person. Ken, would you like to go first?
Well, as a performer, I mean, that's kind of, we'll probably get to that later in how we interpret things. But interestingly for me, I really wasn't that aware of Harvey Milk until later on, because my age group, whatever you want to call it, I was in New York, and I went from here, my hometown, to New York. So I was much more aware of the Orchid Lords and the Marsha P. Johnson, the people who were the East Coast pioneers and so forth. But once I became aware of Harvey Milk, I don't know how would I say it. It was almost like he was a fantasy character, because he was so outside of my experience, you know. And we would get these waves of theory about what he had done and so on and so forth. And San Francisco is a very specific environment. And it's very political. It always has been. And I think, to be honest, I think it was political before New York, as far as the LGBTQ community. And to start being exposed to someone like Harvey through the conversations and things was really interesting for me. I mean, like I said, I really didn't know much about him. And I honestly found out the most about him when I saw both of these features, because they gave me background, not only to what he had accomplished, but why and how. And that was when I felt like I'd met the person, not just the legend or the conversation even, but actually the person, as much as you could consider everybody's own narrative interpretation. So that was kind of how I felt about the person as a performer. I'm not sure how it relates. We probably get with that in terms of what politics is and so forth.
I have a similar story. When I was a young gay man, I came out and I had an older gay brother who gave me a book called The Gay 100. And of course, Harvey Milk was in there. And this is also when I was kind of finding my cinephilia too. So these two things converged, and the idea of him being sort of a fantasy figure is what we're talking about here too, because it's hard to reach back into the actual truth, right, the actual origin point of Harvey Milk. But these works that we're talking about are attempting to create that. Jim, what about you? What's your experience with Harvey?
Well, you know, like Ken, I don't think that I was really aware of so much of Harvey Milk, and you know, until he was murdered, because that was the big moment. And I think I'm definitely of a generation where, you know, I experienced so many things when I was younger, watching them on TV, and everything was so vivid. And I remember his murder and being so perplexed by it. It's like, who was this person? And San Francisco was such a foreign place to me. You know, I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma. And then I started learning about Harvey Milk, you know, why was this, you know, this murder so horrific, and this one person, why was he so significant? And, you know, and I would say that's, you know, how I learned about him. And then at the time, my own coming out and trying to, do a lot of reading about people. And so, I was always trying to, pick up biographies and, to learn about, other, gay politicians or activists or artists or whatever. And I guess the thing that, there was a book called Mayor of Council Street, which I also just loved the title of. I thought that was like, gotta read that because that sounds like it's a good title. And then gradually, understanding that he wasn't just a gay icon, he was a civil rights icon. And I think that was the thing for me, because I think that's how I view him, particularly as I've been working on this new version of the opera Harvey Milk, which was written 30 years ago and hasn't really been done since. So that's why we're really excited about doing it. So that's pretty much my experience.
Very good. Yeah. Well, in talking about the opera, the two films, literature, Ken, you've worked in every kind of art one could imagine, from doing voiceover in film and television to on-screen performance, voice and television, directing theater, of course, being on the stage. Do you think that the medium, the chosen medium, in centering the two films, we're talking about documentary versus narrative. Do you think that medium sort of dictates the way you would tell a story like this? Or is it always just going to be the same no matter what?
No, I think it definitely dictates, because you think about not just Harvey, right? I could talk about anyone. You're gathering material, you're gathering facts, hopefully, and you're assembling them into something that's presentation to an audience. So you're really only dealing with what is true, is supposed to be. That's how they said it to me at any rate. Documentaries are supposed to be true, and that's what it should be. And I think when you're looking at that, I always feel, when I'm watching a documentary, it's just really when I watch something Harvey, that I was getting this sort of behind the scenes idea of who he was, because it was so almost cinema verite in a lot of ways, It was like, this is what happened, and these are the people, and this is a photograph of them together at the Hamptons, all those sort of things. So for me, that's where media, in terms of telling a historical figure story, the narrative versions of things, particular bits. Well, I don't want to get ahead of your questions, but there's a little bit of leeway in terms of how you tell a story, because it has to be not only possess the truth of the person and their life, it also has to make cinematic sense. Mm. And I think that's what people get a little caught up sometimes, because they go, well, you have it to act in it. But the arc of the story for them is better to put it before. And a lot of directors I know who've done films like that, they'll say, well, as long as it's in there, in terms of the cinematic perspective, that's more important than saying A was before B was before C. That's, well, in this version, it was going to be before A. But the sum total of the story is still true. Mm. And that comes up a lot in historical things, we tell stories, narratives. I don't think one is better than the other necessarily. I think one might be according to your own intellectual appetite. One might be more appetizing than the other. Some people love it and call it a narrative, like a story that's being told, a framework. They like that because they get lost in it, you get lost in characters and the setting, everything just goes brought to life. But it's sort of a marvel in that way. I mean, the scenes and the film version of it with their orchestra street, it's hard to imagine how they did that, how they recreated that, right? And you look at the documentary where it's film footage and it's maybe stills, that's the real thing. But there's something about the actual art form of making a film that becomes part of the thing as well as the truth of it, I think.
There's a concept that Werner Herzog, the great filmmaker, talks about. And he's someone who's dipped into both realms, but maybe even for himself, he wouldn't even think of them as different realms, where he talks about the ecstatic truth of things, which means there's a higher truth than what you might perceive as reality, right? It's interesting you bring that up about San Francisco. One of the conditions for Sean Penn being cast in Milk is said that we have to go to the streets of San Francisco. You can't recreate this. And of course, Gus Van Sant was like, yeah. Doing that. What is the concern for you with the truth question, and in particular with the film, the things that you've mounted that are concerned with true life stories?
You know, let's say one thing before you say, if you have not seen Fireshot on this, I don't know if it's available to see it again. I watched it from the Met.
Oh, you did?
And I saw Chen.
Oh, great.
It's brilliant. It's not good, it's brilliant. And wherever you do, steal it. If you have to go to someone illegally, go and see it, because it's really achievement. They both are.
That means a lot. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, you know, I think as far as film goes, I'm a huge film buff, and I tend to watch an equal amount of documentary film as I do narrative film. And I'm always interested in how people adapt, a film based on somebody that we really know. Because you do have we have the luxury now of looking at so much documentary footage of, just say Harvey Milk, or somebody else who's in my mind right now is, is Champion, the boxer Emil Griffith. And, we can go back and we can look at that. But I'd like to see how things are adapted and how things are expanded, maybe romanticized a little bit. Emotionalized, sometimes it's a term that I like to think about when I'm looking at stuff like that. So I think these two films are very, very important because, in Milk, a lot is there that may or may not have happened, and I think that's okay. And, whenever you do theatrical adaptations of people's lives, and God knows, operatic adaptations of, and we tend to do that a lot in opera these days in the 20th century and the 21st century. Emil Griffith, famous gay boxer, Charles Below at Fire 790, Richard Nixon. There's all of these events. So I think that I just think good storytelling is good storytelling. And I think for me, it's probably harder to make a really compelling documentary for some reason. That just strikes me as a harder thing to take on.
Yeah, to me, it seems like with a documentary, you have to, it's like you have a box, they give you things, and you have to use those things. With a narrative film, you can add stuff to the box, you can take things out of the box, you can do all this stuff. With a documentary, you just gotta use what's there. You can't really deviate, because someone's gonna go, that did not.
You deviated.
You deviated. And here's the picture, I was there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's an interesting point you bring that up, because I feel as if Milk is actually an adaptation of the times of Harvey Milk. And Gus Van Sant is a director who is very concerned with adaptation. Everything from doing a shot-for-shot remake of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho to telling, true-to-life stories like this. But also it's a seminal queer film, but it's a seminal film as well. I mean, one of the great things I talked about last night, one of the great things about the film that I did talk about last night is how it narrativizes the story into a 3-act structure, and Epstein and his crew were looking to find the opera within it, which is especially important because Harvey was such a patron of the arts, and opera specifically.
And how that's used.
Yeah, and it's really key in the film, especially towards the end too, in Milk. I want to get to the gay question. The gay question is, Sean Penn is not, notoriously not gay, right? Van Sant is, Epstein is, and most of the actors in Milk are not. And we were talking beforehand, it's interesting that two openly out performers That's Victor Garber and Dennis O'Hare play straight men in the film, and it seems, as far as I know, straight actors play the gay men in the film. It's 2008, and this is a conversation we've been having since then. Thoughts and feelings on it?
Well, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think, in truth, this is the truth that I know as an actor at least, the real issue has to do with jobs.
Yes.
There are so many gay actors, I'm one of them, who possibly would not be hired for certain straight roles because they say you read as gay. So they won't hire you. So when a gay role comes along, it's like, well, surely this must be the role for us. And then when, a straight actor gets cast, it's almost like, well, what are the roles we're supposed to play? We don't get to play the straight people, we don't get to play the gay people. Who do we play? The tree in the backyard? So I think that's the real basis of it. It's about a job issue. But I will use, if I may, an example for myself, what we did, we have Choice on Trilogy. And I was, working on Broadway at the time, and Harvey, who
The other great Harvey.
who, of course, had laid amazing groundwork, having done the plays off-Broadway, and then on Broadway. And when it came time to cast the film, of course, he really wasn't the first choice. I think Dustin Hoffman was. But anyway, he did it. And then when it came time to cast the role that I was his best friend, there came an issue of, there were people that were castable, there were people who were available, but he wanted, he said, someone who understood the sensibility of the friendship between the two characters, which meant being gay.
Right.
Okay, that's just the groundwork. I have friends who told me, don't do it. It will ruin your career, you will never do it on the film, and never, don't do it. Well, I did. And then I had friends say, bury it. I said, bury it as fast as you can. Put it at the bottom of your resume, don't talk about it again. And I'm thinking to myself, do you have any idea how proud I am to be in this amazing piece of writing and history for us? And, it occupies a space in the trajectory of our evolution as people. But that, in fact, to what we're saying, which it is, if you're a gay actor and you have some sense of politics about your work, and a role comes along that's for you, and it's a gay role, I think that's why you have the issues with someone like Sean Penn, which is wonderful, playing Harvey Milk, because was there somebody, now this is my argument, that was not popular amongst people. I said, was there a gay, openly gay actor who wanted to play Harvey Milk in a feature film? Well,
I think that's a fair question.
Well, that's a fair question. I thought, well, if there's nobody that you knew who had their hand raised, who was a major star, I would say it, and was gay and open and ready, then what are you writing about? That was just my thinking at the time, And I think it goes back and forth, as you were saying. Yeah.
And someone who would be possessed by Harvey.
Yeah, that would allow themselves
Yeah.
to be possessed.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm very much on the same page as Ken.
Oh, I just said that, though.
You did.
But sorry.
And I think the reason why it has to do with the fact that even now, if you're going to cast an out gay actor and you want major star power, or you're going to find somebody who's out, and
Do you know what I mean? It's like,
and when the movie was made, how many out actors were there that had in the box office? Probably not many. And I think before our discussion this evening, we were talking about, say, a film like Brokeback Mountain, which I think is an extraordinary film. But, what on earth possessed a straight Taiwanese director to make that film? But he sure did it well. And, I think that we just, I would just like to think that gay actors can play straight roles, straight actors can play gay roles. You know, I read an interview with Jonathan Bailey, who's in Bridgerton, young actor, totally out. But, you know, this most recent version of Bridgerton, this season, you know, he's like a notoriously straight character in this, and that's fine. I think it has to do with jobs. Sure. Who's willing to take on these things? You know, I had this question asked of me recently. You know, this opera, Harvey Milk, is written by Stuart Wallace, who was straight, and he wrote this 30 years ago. And now today, people say, well, you know, how dare we have a nerd or a straight guy to write an opera about a gay icon? And I was like, well, 30 years ago, the Milk was doing it, and I thought he did it justice. And, you know, our dear friend Terence Blanchard wrote 2 operas about, you know, bisexual black men, gay men, actually, depending on how you look at it. And I don't remember anybody saying how dare Terence Blanchard take on Charles Blow's life or Bill Griffith's life. I think, you know, Terence was celebrated for doing this, and Terence is a very straight man. So
I think it has a lot to do with. I was thinking 2 things at the same time. I do done a lot lately, but I'll go on the limb here, I guess, and say that I think anyone who can do something should do it. But there's politics in between. That's the problem. We haven't gotten to one in society where it's a level playing field. Look at everybody just approach it. You know, like, well, you're the best one. You take it. You take it. You take it. You're gay. You're going to play Bridgerton. You go for it. You're not gay. You're going to play Harvey Milk. Great. The politics of the environment or the social environment is what really kind of gets in the way. Because to me, if you can connect, and not to get, you know, too guru, but if you can connect in spirit, why shouldn't you be able to do it? Who knows within any of us what spirit may be there that connects with that character? Whether we're gay or straight or, you know, a rhinoceros or whatever it might be. If there's something within you that connects to that spirit, you should be able to do that as an artist. Because it's in the world of art, in my opinion, those kind of distinctions should not be part of the conversation. We should be able to do anything we can do. You think about Shakespeare, well, women's roles were done by men. I mean, you know, that's, of course, a million years ago. But, you know, now I'm of the mind somebody says, well, this, I wanted to do what still is. Okay, never mind, that's a recording. But, you know, why not play a part if you can? You know, I think there are women who would love to do some of Shakespeare's men's roles. They're doing it now, interestingly enough. A couple of female actors that have done Hamlet, I think in London and so forth, brilliantly, and nobody believes. I think Gigi Davis did King Lear a season or 2 ago on Broadway. So we're getting there, you know. But the politics of the regular have to be gotten past first, I think, before we can get to an even playing field within that.
Yeah, it's a very complicated issue because on one hand, how do we get queer stories told on this kind of level? We're talking about a film called Milk, which is made by a subsidiary of Universal, by an openly out and a very important figure in queer cinema, Gus Van Sant. But Gus Van Sant's not selling anything. Sean Penn would sell things. But Harvey Milk also sells things too.
Yeah, I want to say one thing, if I may, really quickly, and I'll take too much time. How many of you saw the film Netflix film adaptation of Boys in the Band?
yes.
Yeah. Well, I saw it when they did the revival in Broadway. I just see it. We saw it on Netflix. That is a great example of all what we're talking about. All of those men in that are openly gay actors who have some name value and so forth, as is Ryan Murphy, who's one of the Hollywood's leading producers now. They all came together. There was controversy. Boys in the Band is out. And I said, it's from my view, I said, it's a wonderful play and all the other things, but how important is it that this play that was done in the late 60s, where predominantly the cast was gay, which is probably the first time it really, said that way. Here are all these men who are all known actors, who have achieved awards, careers, everything, that they can come together, do this play on Broadway, the film it, and keep going. It did not stop their careers. It did not give them a kick-up. It was like, well, they're all raised, we're really gay, what should we be poison about? That's a major place to reach, And they all go on to do other wonderful things. And I think that's a real sign of what we're talking about. So let me make sure I mentioned that before. But Mark Crowley.
Well, to your point, I think we have a special message from David Rothenberg, who's a veteran Broadway producer and prisoners' rights activist, and picked up what Harvey was doing and was an openly gay man who ran for office in New York. So I think we have a special video message from him.
Hello, I'm David Rothenberg. When I ran for city council in New York City in 1985, the shadow of Harvey Milk's life and death was a real presence. Mine was the first highly publicized candidacy of an openly gay male since the murder of Harvey. And there was some concern and warnings for my safety. Harvey, who was the model to emulate, would have not had the patience for the fears of the unknown. He was a positive spirit, which was contagious. He celebrated all people, but particularly had a concern for the marginalized, those people who were overlooked. For decades, I've been affiliated with the Fortune Society, an organization that works with formerly incarcerated men and women coming out of prison. And I hope that my life's work has a positive effect on their lives, people who otherwise might have been lost. Once you get past the labels, it's all about compassion, passion, listening, and hopefully some laughter. Those are the ingredients for healing. Harvey Milk and healing. Now there's a fit. The hurts and the wounds owned by people who have been ridiculed or abandoned or ostracized can be lessened when there's someone listening to them, when they can be heard. That's the start of the healing. And Harvey was in that arena. He will be remembered as a political pioneer, but before that, he was a healer. A remarkable man whose presence has remained long after he's left the planet. That's the stuff of grand opera.
In the work that you do, the two of you do you find your art is inherently political? Are you able to separate politics out of it? Where does political activism come in or not? Maybe talk about the Milk Opera in this context.
Sure. It's funny. I do a lot of new operas. I do a lot of, operas based on, real people. And, some of the things that we've done at Opera Theater St. Louis, for example, a lot of these new works are maybe quietly, maybe not so quietly, about social justice. And I think that it's not that we shy away from being political, it's just that I'm interested in telling a good story with really good music, and it's not the social justice message. It's not that that's being done quietly. It's just that I think you can make huge impacts with audiences when you are telling a story that is a good story with good music that also has the weight of an important message. And I think about some of the crazy things we've done over the years and they're not all crazy, but it's I mentioned Terence Blanchard's operas. for one thing. I mean, that's, Terrence had never written an opera before, and now he's considered, one of America's great opera composers, which is like thrilling, because, we gave him his first opportunity. We created operas based on Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas, and that was actually an opera very much about two women who, survived it all, and in many ways it was about gay marriage. We've done all of these different things. With Harvey Milk, I think what's exciting about it is I think Harvey Milk had a big, messy, operatic life. We know that. That's a fact, right? And I think that what Michael Corey, the librettist, and what Stuart Wallace did was they embraced that. They didn't make fun of it. They didn't send it up. They treated it in a very honest, sincere way. And there's a lot to unpack in this opera. And I feel like 30 years ago, they believed that Harvey Milk's story was a great story. Why it hasn't been done for 30 years, I'm not sure. Well, I know one reason: it was too long. Most operas are too long. And we frequently commission people to do a reduced version of something. It's like, we're going to give you a chance to have a second look. And their first version had everything crammed into it. And you just don't need all that information. So they went back and they really streamlined the piece. And I think they've made it a better piece. So, I don't know, did that more or less touch on what you're...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the idea that they're inseparable.
Absolutely.
You can't, especially when you're mounting something concerned about queer life, whether it is about a queer politician or about queer academics or queer performers or queer cowboys, you're doing something political in putting the spotlight on it.
Well, and I would say, I think that to that point, I think we've done more of that at Opera Theater of St. Louis than any other opera company in the country. And I think it's because we haven't been afraid to tell them stories. I mean, not once since I've been doing this has somebody said, "Oh my God, we can't tell that story." Just didn't happen. It's really like, how can we do that story justice? So we have the right creators creating the story. And I think I'm very proud of that because we have touched on a lot of queer issues over the years and things we've presented.
One question I wanted to ask you, that Jeff just brought up was, as a performer, what do you owe the source, whether it be the text or a cultural moment or a historic figure? What do you owe them when you tell their story? Do you owe them anything?
Well, there's two answers. There's the answer that's the general answer, I guess, for every actor, if you will, I could say, but I won't say that, but I can speak for myself. Yes. I can't imagine what it is, even cats, when you're playing cats, you still owe them to at least go into the poetry and say, what was his intention? What did he want it to be? What was he trying to say? It really was a political, a bit of a political statement on society. Mm-hmm. They were written for children, but he was actually mirroring the society. Buster Jones is the privileged character on, street, so forth. And you really even the idea, forgive me to use this as an analogy, but even Grisabella, who we all can say, well, that's that lady who now has is homeless. And even then, he was making a commentary on, it's not the person that flashes this, that in the show. People used to ask me, why does she get to go there? How come it wasn't the guy who made a great number, the one who did the good dance so good? So, but I think the inherent message, if there's a political at all, was the person most deserving is the one who suffered the most. And that is T.S. Eliot's sort of, certainly was Trevor Nunn as director of Cats. And I think even if you can find that in Cats, you can almost find anything, right? But for myself personally, I always try to understand the person's, I think I go first to their upbringing, if it's available, or I'll make it up, backstory. What's their upbringing? Because just the upbringing can give you a lot of background as to their politics, why they are the way they are, or if they came from a home where it was a very liberal, so they went out into the world with liberal mentality, or they came from the opposite, so they went out into the world constricted, or bursting forth into the world. It gives you a very clear sense of who that person is, as far as anything political that might be part of the plot of the story. For me, I always try to embrace some of that because it gives you something to hold on to. Now, I am not, fortunately, I haven't done a lot of projects that had a lot of that as a necessity. Again, I'm in sorts of trilogy, seeing the play and understanding like Milk or like Lady Boys the Man before it, it had a tremendous message to people at the time. And it really said things that had not been said at all. One of the lines everybody always remembers is the mother, not the gay character. The mother says, "You shut me out of your life, and then you blame me for not being there." That was a huge statement to the gay community. Because a lot of us say, well, my parents support me, they listened to me, they threw me out, anything that was possible. But she's never got to hear the other side. And a gay man wrote that and gave the mother that voice. And it spoke to people. I took my mother to see it. She went, that's kind of true. But, as far as being true to what someone's politics, in politics, many things different people would face that, But the idea of being true to yourself, being true to the story you're trying to tell as an actor, has a lot to do with that, And I think it's thrilling as an actor when you get a role that has the subterranean underpinnings of things that you should mine, that you should bring a political sensibility forward, as far as, again, using short some, even the choice to cast an African-American actor. Most people, because we talked to Murray and Peace on the phone, most people assumed that Murray was another Jewish American person, like Harvey, like Arnold. And the choice to cast an African-American was already a political statement. It's like these two people were best friends in that world at that time. And even that's a statement, right? So I remember talking to Harvey and I said, well, why are we best friends? And he said, well, why wouldn't we be? And I thought, that's the best answer. Why wouldn't we be? We came from the same place, and that echoed into us doing the film because we both had come out at the same time. We were talking earlier about experiences. There was one scene where we were coming in and out of the bars, and one of the bars was a women's bar, and we went in and they ran us out. So we went running down the street, we turned the corner at the end of the street, and we both stood there and said, it feels like the old days, the real old days. And I said, yeah, and we walked back arm in arm to the set. They were like, oh, for God's sake, the two of you. But we realized that reality is playing out in the characters, on. So the idea of politics and reality for the actor, I think, is probably most important. Can you imagine John playing Harvey Milk and not being dialed completely in? And we could go on another role that people have done, straight or gimmick. And because on every behaviors are never all the sensibility about all of that. That's an assumption, I'll stop talking. I can go on forever.
I'd love to hear that, Brian. One other thing about this is, we work with a lot of young artists at Opera Theater, and I work with a lot of young artists in opera in general when I'm doing things. And the thing that I thought was really a bit alarming is when we were auditioning for the opera, and a couple of young artists, like in their early 20s, said, by the way, who's Harvey Milk? And I thought, wow. So I feel like if there if there are films out there that raise people's awareness, if we do an opera and we've got 36 young singers in it, and they all learn something about it, and they understand the importance of Harvey Milk, all of that, then we're also doing our jobs as artists and as arts institutions. Because sometimes we have to educate people. We had to do that. I've done that with so many other things. I remember doing an opera called Nixon in China, where people, a lot of young people in the show said, "So Nixon, China, what is this whole thing about?" And they didn't understand it. So it's kind of like a history lesson, and actually audiences too. I mean, sometimes when you're working on something that's deeply rooted in history, and I particularly like those types of stories, that we're expanding people's minds. We're hopefully creating an experience that makes them want to learn more about something.
I went on television to promote this very event, and I was thrown by the first question. And the first question was, "Can you tell us about Harvey Milk?" And I was like, oh, I guess people need that context, right? People aren't aware of who Harvey Milk is these days. What is his legacy for us now? What is the importance of doing the Milk Opera or of showing these films to the public right now?
Well, I think it's just, it was just said, to not only educate from scratch, if you will, but also to remind people not to forget, because so many of our historical figures, certainly within the gay community, the LGBTQ community, it's easy as you go back 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years on back to forget it, to forget what they did and why it was so important. Or to understand that, excuse me, until they did that thing, the landscape was completely different. Because you come along later, and this is not blaming younger people, but you come along later and you walk into a landscape that's already been paved and excavated for you. But somebody did that. And it's really important to know who those people were, and value them. And I say each one teach one. If you know about it, tell somebody else, and then hopefully they'll tell somebody else. When you do the wonderful things that you've done at Opportunity St. Louis, everyone goes out knowing more than they did going in. Only the most educated know everything about it, what I mean? And they go out knowing more. So I think that's the most important thing, is just to make sure that everybody doesn't forget and remembers who these people are in context.
Yeah, and that's a really beautiful way of putting it. And I think the other thing is that I've reminded the people, my younger colleagues, like in their 20s, I say, do you realize without Harvey Milk, you would not be marrying your boyfriend right now? And they're like, whoa, really? You know what I mean? Do you realize that without this person, or without Larry Kramer, there are lots of figures like that, you would not have these freedoms, you would not have this. You should really understand who your, I wouldn't say your ancestors are.
Oh, absolutely.
But what that? Your ancestors.
Yeah.
And I think that's very, very important. And also it's very important to show that these people were not saints. That they, as I said before, I think Harvey Milk had a big, messy, operatic life. And that's okay, because I think that just makes him a little more easy to identify with.
Sure.
If he's perfect, what good does that do us? It's like, I will never aspire to be that good and that strong. But when you realize what crap he went through in his life personally and all of that, but he found his calling in a really unique place, a really unique time in history, and we all benefit from it. As I'm giving a talk to some people the other day about this, and Sean Kern, who was co-director on Harvey Milk, the opera, we were running this little session, and we said it was all a group of gay singers and dancers. And we said, we are all Harvey Milk. You know, we all have that in our DNA, and we should be thankful for it. Now we just have to figure out why it's important and how to bring this to light.
Well, on the topic, we have one final message from former New Jersey Governor Jim McGreevey, who's going to answer my question. He knew. How did he know?
Hi, my name is Jim McGreevey. I previously served as governor of the state of New Jersey and now have the privilege of working with people coming home from state prison, county jail, and addiction treatment. But today I'd like to recognize the vision, the leadership, and the example of the person in Harvey Milk. Not only for his willingness and his courage to put his name on a ballot and run into the great American electoral process, but to fight for those basic LGBTQ rights that are so incredibly important. Milk was in many ways a prophet. And while members of our community aren't being shot at across the nation, they're being challenged in different ways. For me, as an American, when I look at people like David Rothenberg and David Mixner, and particularly Harvey Milk, I see prophets, I see pioneers. Frankly, no one's shooting at my generation or the next generation. But that doesn't mean we have to be courageous, assiduously defend our rights, and be mindful of the changes both in state legislatures, the Congress, and the United States Supreme Court, as well as state courts across the nation. So as you deliberate Milk's legacy, yes, this is a message of hope, but it's also a message of vigilance. That we do not honor Milk's legacy if we are not consistently vigilant in the protection of our rights and ensuring that the next generation of members of our community share in the vision and the hope who was Harvey Milk. Thank you.
Excellent. I think we have a few minutes for audience questions. Chris got a microphone, so if you want to go ahead and raise your hand.
Well, I think, like you said, we don't know what would have been, so there's that. And also, I think when someone's life, anyone's life, certainly someone's already in the arena of doing something, when their life is cut short, it automatically puts them in a realm different than everyone else. You can even go to someone like Chris Stein or somebody else. Good press. Well, it's press. Maybe good press. It's the press. The paintings were they're elevated. There's a long list, like you named the people. There's so many more political types that we could name that because their demise was part of their narrative in the end, it elevated them into so we talk about EGOT, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony, people. Right. It's put that group. Only those people exist in that play.
Well, I think one of the purposes of Rob Epstein's documentary was to not do that necessarily, but to continue on the legacy. That's what he said, was that there was a fear that the story would be lost to time if they didn't document it somehow. I'm wondering if that adds a complication to your question too, is that not only is the martyr idea, is it furthered by telling a martyr story with it? But I won't say that these two works martyr him in that way.
Well, I have a question in that case. Who decides who's the martyr?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, is the people who are exposed to the tragic story decide it, or do the people who tell the story decide it? I mean, I have no answer on this. It's a real question. Who decides who the martyr is? I mean, we look back at Joan of Arc, and we say, well, she was burned at the stake. Is that because they told the story, or is it because of her sanctity, if you will, or what actually makes that the thing? I just think it's interesting in the film. I'm sorry. No, go ahead. In the film, when you seems not unlike Martin Luther King, not unlike a few people we could name, to have a sense that his mortality was imminent, and therefore recorded himself so that people would hear his words about what he experienced, how he experienced it, knowing that possibly, I think that's a big thing. the story. Whether it's actually true or not, I don't know, but it certainly served the purpose of making him aware that he was already in another realm of possibility of ending his life.
Another thing about it is he was murdered just a few years before the AIDS crisis. So who knows, what would have happened? I mean, it's all speculative, but that's something that Sean Kerr and I were talking about the other day. But I think we also have to be careful about, we don't want to canonize people too much. I think it's their deeds, what they've done, and then we know that there are skeletons in everybody's closets, and that's just part of them being human, which I think is actually a good thing, that they don't seem perfect. Any final comments?
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. No, this has been wonderful. It's been enjoying spending time with you both. Thank you.
And I get to see no.